Hi, my name is Sarah Pollitt. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. I live in San Francisco and I work in hospital management at Sutter Health.
My name is Chris Yanasak. I live in San Francisco and I'm a student.
I have never been to China before.
I have never been to China before.
When I think of China, I think vast and massive with both rural areas and bustling cities.
First thing I think of is a country in transition, economically, politically, socially, and historically.
When I hear the word Chinese people, I think about the country with the biggest population in the entire world.
And people that are usually smaller than me.
I think of big meals, and I think of Chinatown in San Francisco.
We will be traveling in China for 2 weeks through the Northeast in 3 different cities.
Shenyang, Changchun, and Harbin.
I'm extremely excited about the trip.
I can't wait to talk to people there about their lives, to eat the food, and to ride the trains. This is
Riding Rails in China,
part 2. We landed in Beijing late last night.
Currently at the Beijing railway station.
We're taking the high-speed rail to Shenyang.
Should be there in about 4.5 hours.
I'm really stoked.
And I'm looking forward to it. Just arrived in Shenyang from Beijing after about 4.5 hours of traveling around 120 miles per hour.
The train was quite populated and clean. There were really no empty seats. The landscape outside was actually quite diverse. The initial terrain was more industrial and developed with residential high-rises.
About the first couple hours, first half of the trip, I'd say the words that come to mind are concrete and construction.
And then gradually the landscape gave way to more agricultural spaces with rice fields and cornfields.
The first while as we got into the rural area, I was really impressed with the level of polycropping. A lot of different crops being grown in the same area, which usually suggests that most of these crops are being used for local use and subsistence agriculture as opposed to agribusiness and export. One thing I was certainly surprised about was the level of corn. It was by and far the most common crop we saw, which I certainly was surprised. I don't think I usually associate corn with China.
We had a delightful lunch with bento boxes,
which was packaged kind of like a large lean cuisine with rice and meat, some pickled vegetables. Got to use some chopsticks and got to definitely keep practicing on that. Gonna spend the next 3 days here in Shenyang, get to know the city a little bit better, which I'm really excited for. Shenyang is the center of the Shenyang economic zone, and it's one of the top 20 emerging cities in China right now, and the growth here is happening really fast. It'll be interesting to see how that looks, not only on the landscape, but on the people who are living here, and I'm certainly really excited to get a better feel for the city. We just arrived, so we'll see.
Today we're in Shenyang, the capital of the Liaoning province in northeast China.
The actual urban population here is about 5 million, but the greater area, which consists of also a lot of farmland surrounding, is about 8.1 million people and roughly the size of Connecticut.
Shenyang is actually the largest city in northeast China and one of the 10 largest in all of China.
The level of construction and development is really just astonishing. You can't look in any direction without seeing new high-rises being built. It's really impressive, especially considering coming from the States where I was born and raised in Seattle, and the city looks pretty much the exact same for my entire life. And I think that people here are having the opportunity of seeing an entire city actually being built in real time in front of their very eyes. I feel like I could come back here in a few years and not even recognize it.
Early this morning, we arrived at the Shenyang Imperial Palace,
which is the largest and actually only other imperial palace inside of China other than the Forbidden City in Beijing. It's about 1/12 that size, but that should not diminish how big it is by any means.
The palace is around 386 years old, which is quite impressive and like nothing I could ever see in the United States.
You first walk into the palace, you walk into a large open courtyard, some trees planted, and everywhere surrounds you walls, which some have doorways that lead into other areas, and you see some of the main buildings when you first enter.
The first palace we saw had big red Han Dynasty typical columns and very ornate, colorful carvings on the left front and right front, as well as the roof.
It's actually the only palace with 4D dragons, which are dragons that come out 3D from the walls on the outside, but then also continue onto the inside and through the building, which is really interesting to see. One of the areas we spent a lot of time was the area that had been built first on the far east side.
This area was actually built in 1625. The palace itself and the small pavilions were used by the government, but the structure was modeled similar to an army base, with the commander's quarters being the palace itself and the smaller pavilions serving for the generals. It had a long, wide stone walkway about a football field long and 50 yards wide that reminded me of a European town square. It was lined with small pavilions on each side, 5, so 10 total.
Leading up to a main building, which was like a pagoda shape with big stairs that went up to it, real colorful, intricate carvings with 2 big gold dragons going up the main pillars and coming up across the top of it.
Something I found particularly impressive were the front left and front right columns, where there were gold dragons carved into the wood and gold plated with red, green, and blue textures.
Really impressive to see the dragon as a symbol of power, and you can really feel that when you look at it.
In the center was a big wooden throne with a yellow seat and Tibetan script all around it.
And what I was really actually interested to learn was how they had incorporated all different aspects of Chinese culture from all different areas of Chinese. They had parts from Tibet, and they had things that were designed based on the Han Chinese and things from the Manchu people all incorporated into this building.
The name of the palace is the Dazang Palace, and we were told it used to hold ceremonies and special banquets. After checking out that palace, Chris and I proceeded to the interior part of the grounds, where there were gardens and classical music playing.
We saw some people dressed up in the old garb that the emperors and concubines and empresses would have worn at the time, and we went to go get a photo with them when we realized actually what you had was a place where you could pay to wear that, and then they would take a photo of you and you would get the photo. So of course you couldn't pass up an opportunity to do that. And we got all dressed up and wore little funny hats and old costumes that were dressed up like the old emperors and empresses at the time, and took some photos and walked around. So I'm dressed up here as the emperor. You can tell by all of the dragons I am decorated in. A dragon is a symbol of power. I'm feeling quite powerful, especially as people keep looking at me, although they've yet to do anything I order them to do. But perhaps I just need to get a little more heavy-handed.
And I'm dressed in the traditional Qing Dynasty, either queen or concubine garb. As you can see, it's very colorful. The sleeves are very long. Surprised it doesn't fit me better because I'm kind of short. It's a little hot in here, actually, but it's surprisingly flexible. I can move around and dance. The Imperial Palace is actually a museum for ancient relics. Today, in the eastern side, where we saw the Dazhang Palace, we actually saw modern staging and lights set up for the 85th anniversary of the museum. It was quite a contrast to the spiritual, ancient style that we were walking around in.
The level of detail, I would certainly say, is the most astonishing thing to me. A large portion of the city was built between 1625 and 1626, only a year, and the amount of wood carving and stone carving that had to go into that amount of time, the amount of work and people who must have constantly been working was absolutely phenomenal. Actually, they have a library here that was said to contain all of Chinese knowledge of the past 5,000 years when it was built. They all contained inside of that library. And to be in a building that at a time was said to contain all knowledge of all of Chinese history, you just can't wrap your mind around it. It almost consumes you, just is almost too much to even consider. It's humbling, really, the amount of history you feel in the place, especially coming from some place like America where you only have a couple hundreds of years of history. You get to be somewhere where it has thousands of years of history, and you can almost feel that in the way it feels when you first walk in, and it's really breathtaking.
Today was our first full day in Shenyang. It's definitely a bustling, growing metropolitan area with a lot of immigrants. It's a commerce center actually for all of China, and also with Russia and Korea.
You can really feel in a place with that much history and that much influence that it had upon the world, to be there by yourself and feel that much history and experience in that place can make you feel really small and incredibly inconsequential, which can kind of sound bad, but really it isn't, because at the same time you feel a part of something larger, which is, I guess, the greater human story as a whole.
So we're here at the Benxi Water Cave. It's actually in a national park.
Drove out this morning from Shenyang, about a couple hours south. It was really interesting because the city stopped so abruptly, and all of a sudden it's almost like you go back in time. It's a lot of corn and cabbage and rice and small villages here and there. And then all of a sudden along the drive another city would pop up. And further along, and all of a sudden you'd be back in the nature again with really beautiful mountains in the background, kind of beyond a mist of fog today, along a really, really nice winding river. When we got to the Benxi Water Cave and got to go inside, I was just blown away. Even first walking in, the opening of the cave is just enormous.
So you walk in and there's about 75 yards of flat limestone ahead of you, and it gets darker as you emerge into the cave. And we were greeted by a tour guide, and they gave us these big down parka jackets to keep you warm because it's quite cold in the cave. Actually, my feet and hands are still a little bit chilly right now. It's about 54 degrees, I think, year-round.
The cave was discovered in the 60s by a local farmer, as they say, a brave man who finally entered the cave. I guess the opening at that time was much smaller, but they've since expanded it.
And the cave was opened up to the public about 30 years ago.
It was interesting to learn as well that the farmer's still alive. He's 80 now, and his son and his daughter-in-law currently work here.
So you hop into boats right off the limestone. It's sort of like a dock. They have lights strategically placed all throughout the cave. They're red, blue, yellow, green, and they light up the water in absolutely beautiful ways. So the water actually looked inside the cave like a teal light green. And it was totally transparent. And at one point we ran our hands through the water, which was really cold. In certain places it's about 6.5 feet deep. That's usually the average depth of the water. And then there were other deeper places where it was about 20 feet deep and you couldn't see the bottom at all. So if you've ever seen the movie Goonies, it was a lot like that, where you're basically inside a big cavern filled with water.
Being in there today, I just kept thinking, you know, this cave has been here so long, and here I am. I'm just a visitor in and of myself just today in the cave. The cave doesn't remember me, the cave doesn't care, and I'll remember this for the rest of my life.
they have stalactites and stalagmites. So the stalactites are the limestone rock formations that actually reach down from the top of the cave. And the stalagmites come up from the bottom. And occasionally they meet, and it sort of looks like a sandstone timer that you can flip upside down.
They say it takes about 100 years for the stalactites and the stalagmites to grow an inch. And you had some of them that are 15 feet tall and maybe 5 or more feet across. And it was really awe-inspiring to see the big ones. But actually what I really found beautiful was the smaller ones that just come from the top of the cave everywhere, covering the top of the cave, maybe an inch in diameter and 6 inches to a foot long.
So at one point there was water dripping down on Chris and I, and we sort of looked at each other and asked our tour guide about it. And she said that the water was meant to bring good luck and beauty. And it made us realize that there were tiny cracks and holes at the very top of the deep cave. And all of a sudden it dawned on us that there was this huge mountain above us, which was absolutely astounding. You realize that you're in the belly of this really huge rock that's just over your head.
All the boats run on batteries, which is really nice, not only to keep it really clean in there, but it's really quiet and really peaceful. The cave itself at times could be wide enough on the river for 7 boats, and sometimes you can only go 1 boat at a time.
In certain places it was really narrow and we had to duck our heads and we could almost hit the stalactites.
The Benxi Water Cave is called the longest water cave in Asia.
So the whole trip was about 40 minutes. It's about 3 kilometers long, which is just over 1.5 miles. So you basically go to the end and then you turn around and go back, so you get to see all walls of the cave.
They call the large open areas that have loads and loads of the stalactites and stalagmites, they call them palaces, and they're very palace-like, almost like cathedrals. Something like that can't be created by human hands. There's a saying that good things come to those who wait, implying that the best things take a really long time, and I would certainly argue that, especially after being in that cave today.
The entire experience of being inside the cave was like nothing I've ever seen or felt, and it was pretty energizing. When Chris and I docked and got off the boat and we were walking out, you could just see this sort of tunnel vision light ahead, and we walked out and we were just laughing and really excited about the experience. So I'm so lucky to have shared this with him. So today is our 3rd day traveling in Shenyang.
So this morning we started the morning off at the Woot bookstore, which is a bookstore in downtown Shenyang.
It's a 3-level bookstore, cafe, and lecture hall. The first floor has a number of texts, some children's books, some English texts.
Got to look around and everything was in Chinese, but sometimes you would come across one that had the title in English and had some Kafka and some Hemingway and a lot of Western books I was familiar with, and then plenty more Chinese books. And after we were able to look around the bookstore, we went up to the 2nd level of the bookstore where they have a sort of lecture area set up. And it's an area where they go through different programs through the weeks, and at this time they were going through a Harvard University lecture on happiness, based mostly in neuroscience.
Experiences with their friends, with their family, constantly talked about.
There were about 30 people in the room, all young people who were interested in engaging with other people in the city and talking about happiness and sharing their experiences.
And got to watch part of the lecture, kind of the last section of the lecture.
Interesting studies, but if you want more information, you can look there.
And then afterwards they had a discussion. It was an opportunity for the people there to share from their lives and discuss their experiences and compare and contrast. And then when we were able to get involved in the conversation, we got to talk a lot about our respective cultures.
说那个老年人摔跤了的话， 像以往的话，都会有人上前会去扶起他，但是呢，现在的法律出台就是说，你要去了解周围发生什么事儿，然后去理性的对待它，然后才去采取一些措施。那么在美国有没有这样的法律呢？如果在美国发生这样的事情，你们又会去怎么做？
In the United States, I think it's the same. Like she's saying, there are the laws, and there are things that certainly many people would consider.
My instinct would be to help, my absolute first instinct, and I wouldn't stop or hesitate.
They were really interested, I think, especially because this country is shifting and entering the consumer culture where we've been for a long time, and they were asking us about that and what we felt that effect was on us and how we thought that affected our happiness as far as material well-being versus spiritual well-being, and the differences in our culture in America and how we felt about that. So the definition of happiness, I think, is it's very abstract. It's almost impossible to explain, but I think that if you say happiness, I know what you mean, and when I say happiness, you know what I mean. It's something you feel, right? But now I think I'm most happy with my friends. I think especially with the friends that I have known for a long time. When I'm with someone who I feel knows me very well and I know them very well, and you can connect on something of a larger, a deeper level, and it feels very good. And to share just very simple times with them, to go to dinner or to go on vacation, or even small things for skateboarding, or it can be very simple things can make you very happy.
I think real and truthful happiness is a state. It's not an ephemeral feeling. It's not an intoxication. It's not an inebriation. It's a sense of self that's grounded and, not to sound preachy, but contented, and a feeling of home with yourself. It was a very philosophical, abstract, cerebral discussion. So obviously the broader context right now is that China's growing, and with that growth comes a lot of change, and with that change brings stress. And stress can also breed insight, but also doubt, and you start to question the existential meaning of it all, and the value and the purpose that you bring to your own life and to the lives of others.
The perspectives of the students weren't necessarily any more of a surprise to me than speaking to anyone would be a surprise to me. I think if I was surprised, if at all, it was really the similarities between the views on those sort of deeper questions that we all really share.
We all sort of share these basic human questions and longings and yearnings. And despite the language barrier, we're really able to communicate those and share those and laugh about them. And even though we don't have any answers, just the idea that there's a camaraderie of spirit about asking the same questions and wanting good things, not just to be good people, but to be happy people and to make others around us happy, it's actually pretty encouraging. The third floor, actually, of the bookstore is a delightful, well-appointed, light reading room. There were Parisian furnishings, and it was really quiet. They have wireless internet up there. So as the daughter of a librarian, I have a deep respect for books and story time and book discussions. And so this bookstore offers a sort of cross-sectional book experience, very academic, but also a place to share, a library, all of the above. And so it's a fantastic resource for the young community in Shenyang.
So we are in Cafe 413, which is a cafe and a sort of youth gathering spot that is set up here in Shenyang by a local artist who hosts different events each week, and each week has a different theme based on different arts and sort of crafts and projects for the youth here and the local people to come and get together and work on.
It has vintage relics from the 80s because the gentleman who began it decided that he wanted to surround himself with childhood memorabilia. It's about the size of a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco, and it's a really unique spot in Shenyang.
One of the guys here is telling us that this is a really nice thing for Shenyang to have because there isn't a lot of places in the city like this for youth to go. There's a lot of bars and clubs, but nothing where people can come together and really discuss and share experiences and learn and do different things together.
It almost seems like a very therapeutic environment. I know that they advertise on the internet and people have found it through the internet, and so they don't know each other otherwise, so it brings together people from lots of different walks of life. It's a refuge of sorts. It's a place to discuss politics, it's a place to discuss art, and it seems to make people really happy.
This week, the project was sculpting, and they had a guest lecturer come in and show some of pictures of his work and describe sort of the process of sculpting, and then we each got a big chunk of clay and were able to give it a try ourselves.
So I made a face. It was a work in progress and probably still is. Chris made a piano, and we sort of teamed up and helped each other out, which was really fun.
But the finished project wasn't necessarily something I would go out of my way to show anyone.
I'm actually holding a clay piece that I just designed. We just watched a lecture, and the artist here showed us how to make faces, so I tried to make my own. There isn't much of an expression here, but this is my first time working with clay, so I did my best, and everyone's been very encouraging.
So what I made was a piano because I play the piano and my whole family pretty much does, and because it's only squares and circles, so it's the easiest. In fact, the majority of this whole shape here was what the block they already gave us, so it's pretty simple to throw together.
Ooh.
Tools. Man down.
Obviously, the best way to travel is to really talk to local people and get a ground level experience and feel like a part of the community and see what day-to-day life might be like if you were to live in another culture. So today definitely provided insight into that. We've spent the majority of today talking to people, interacting and engaging, and this is really the first time we've been able to do that.
The interaction we had with Chinese youth really increased my understanding of China. It's a completely different thing to study the history and the culture and the politics and the economics of a country versus coming here and meeting with the people. And again, I think I was just incredibly struck by the similarities. You could have picked the people up and put them in San Francisco and would not find that many differences. And it's been really interesting to be involved doing different things with these people.
Today was probably my favorite day overall, mainly because it was just our first real opportunity to talk to people, local people about their experiences, share things about our families and our beliefs, and talk about the meaning of life. So hard to turn a dialogue like that down, especially for me.
All right, our time in Shenyang has come to a close. Had a great time, but it is on to the next one.
Chris and I just boarded the train to Changchun, and we're super amped for the ride.
So we are on the train now out of Shenyang, headed to Changchun, a little differently this time. We are not on the high-speed train, we've got our own little cabin here.
It's a gorgeous day. We're heading north, and yeah, we're excited to see the countryside. Last time we saw a lot of cornfields, some coal, pretty diverse terrain, so we're stoked. Just had a really tasty lunch in the dining car.
So passing from our car down a few cars to get to the lunch car, you move through a few different sections of the train. We're in the cabin section, and then the next couple here down are probably the little less expensive ones that have 3 beds on either side in each little room as you pass, and there's also small tables on the opposite side where people can sit and kind of seats that fold down from the wall.
There was a symphony of snoring in some of the cars. dish was incredible. We had some chicken and pretty spicy chicken, and also a traditional northeastern China dish, which was pork and yam noodles, pretty tasty.
Actually got to drink a nice red wine. I work in a French restaurant, Chez Spencer, in San Francisco, so I definitely like to drink a lot of wine. It was a cab sauv from China, and hadn't really even known that China produced wine. It was probably something pretty new for them, but I was pleasantly surprised. It was really good.
It's good. The train is actually entirely electric powered, so I'm feeling pretty good about our carbon footprint right now.
Outside, it really reminds me a lot of the Midwest in the United States. A lot of corn, except it's even better because there's actually trees and rivers and things to break up the view.
And actually, we just discovered why there's so much corn all around us. We learned that 7 of the top 10 corn-producing counties in China are in this province. So right now we're traveling through the Jilin province, and we're heading to Changchun. We're about 15 minutes away from our destination.
I'll be glad to see what Changchun has going on.
So today is our first day in Changchun. It's the capital of the Jilin province in northeastern China. And it has a population of about 7.5 million, so it's a little bit smaller than Shenyang. It's just as industrial. It's actually affectionately referred to as China's Detroit because it's the center of the automotive industry here.
The people here are really kind. You can feel the city and the vibe of it. It's been really nice. I had a chance to walk around and really enjoying the time here so far.
And the area of the city is roughly the same size as the state of New Jersey. So right now we are visiting the World Sculpture Park in Changchun. It's in the south part of the city, and it was opened in 2003. It features 450 different sculptures from artists over 215 different countries,
offering all different portrayals of not only cultures and lifestyles and continents, but also styles of art. They have art from Eskimo and Mayan and Maori cultures, which was really neat to see.
We moved through the park on a small van that didn't have any sides or doors, so you really felt like you were sort of moving quickly through the sculptures and you could see everything. It's a really big park. It covers about 230 acres.
As a park alone, it's really, really beautiful. There's a lake running through the middle and a lot of nice landscaping and paths that go all around and trees and flowers, and it's done really well. And then you throw in all the incredible sculpture and it's a real world-class exhibition that they have here.
And the centerpiece is called Friendship, Peace, Spring, and it's a really beautiful, magnificent sculpture in the middle of the park surrounded by water. And then you look up and about 200 feet in the air is the very top of the sculpture. And it features 3 different women, each representing friendship, peace, and spring. It was designed by 5 different sculptors in China. In addition to the outdoor sculpture park, there are also 2 indoor museums, and one of them is an African art sculpture museum. And when we stepped foot there, it sort of reminded me of the De Young or even the Tate Modern in London. It's a really beautiful modern museum that was opened 1 week ago. At the entrance of the African Art Museum, there were about 400 different panels with really colorful paintings of safari creatures and all kinds of African landscapes. And they were all apparently done over the period of 1 night by several different artists. And they were placed on the wall to sort of showcase the African landscape.
I think my favorite part was definitely the African Museum. It was just massive, the amount of work that was inside that place, and it was even more impressive that it was all donated by a single couple who began their careers in Africa as Chinese diplomats.
And over the course of 30 years, they accumulated and amassed all these sculptures. And it features art and sculpture from Malawi, Zambia, and Tanzania.
They had a lot of work from the Makonde and the Maasai tribes, which are respectively based in East Africa and Southern Africa. And it was predominantly, if not almost all, wood sculptures from different types of wood. And then even some wood that they described is said to have a 3,000-year life cycle, and they had two separate colors of wood inside.
And what's really interesting about these sculptures is that they're all made from one piece of wood.
And some of the sculptures were twice as tall as I am. Some of them that were really interesting was a style that had been used in the Makonde tribe where all the faces are meant to sort of shock you or surprise you or almost make you feel a little uncomfortable just by really odd shaped faces, and almost you might describe it as kind of disgusting or deformed looks on the faces that are supposed to spark a certain emotion in you, stir up to make you think, and they definitely did that. So walking around, there's one particular piece that struck me in the museum that really was a personal piece for me. When I immediately saw it, it really meant a lot to me. So this piece here in the African Art Museum inside the Sculpture Park is one that's really affected me. The first time I left home was when I was 18. I spent 5 months traveling by myself through Africa. It was probably the most defining part of my life so far. And this piece has just really spoken to me. I think it's mostly his eyes. I feel they're very saddened, and I looked at them, I felt like he was sad at the loss of a culture and a way of life as that country is developing, the continent is developing. And I don't mean to say that it's an equal or fair comparison, but I felt that for me, I also felt that sadness of the loss of that part of my life, that transition from being a kid to being an adult. And I feel the sadness from that is actually quite difficult to see and to feel that.
As we moved through the park, there were so many pieces that really resonated with me, but one in particular was called Balance Road. I'm walking through the heart of one of my favorite sculptures here. It's a wire tunnel surrounded by big shoulders and a head. Half of it is shiny metal and the other half is a sort of muted black gray metal. And it sort of explores the idea of balance as well as the bifurcated soul. And it reminded me a lot of the Cylon character, which is on Battlestar Galactica. And it sort of talks about the idea that you may be half human or half machine and you have an identity crisis. And it's just a really beautiful piece, really bold, really modern on this green countryside.
Every piece that is in this was created in Changchun and using lots of local materials, and they found artists from all over the world, and some of those artists were able to ship some materials that they use from their local area here. So you have some place that represents a huge amount of culture from all over the world, but still maintains its local, it's the importance of the locality of it and where it is.
With all the economic and financial growth, many cities in China are known for their pollution. In Shenyang, we could sort of see the haze and feel the grime around us. But Changchun is quite refreshing. As you can see, it's very green, the sky is blue, and it's really, really beautiful despite the financial and economic growth here as well. And Changchun is actually known as one of the top 5 quality of life cities to live in China.
And it's often said that they've done this economic development at the expense of everything else, but being here today, you definitely realize that is not always the case, that as they've developed economically and industrially, they've been sure to incorporate and to also develop in the arts and in what they're able to provide to their public as public places and museums, and the importance of art in their culture. So we're here on Guilin Road in Changchun. It's a really popular street for shopping. We've just kind of been doing some browsing around, going in and out of stores and looking at what they have to offer, maybe buying things.
They have a lot of hair salons and shoe shops. And we walked into one open entrance and there was a maze of jewelry and bags. It's in the main cosmopolitan district here in Changchun.
The stuff was relatively expensive, more than I expected it to be. It wasn't any price drop between anything I would have seen in the United States for the same gear.
Guilin Road is actually known for its hip fashion. Everyone walking around is young. There are people wearing those big, sort of huge framed hipster glasses. Lots of funky hairdos and bows and really colorful clothing and sweet shoes, funky fresh styles. On a whim, I actually decided to get a haircut, so I walked into one of the many salons and got this very fashionable hairdo. It was sort of a unique experience, actually. They washed my hair, they shampooed it in the chair in front of the mirror. It was sort of a dry shampoo, and then they used a squirt bottle and put a little water on it and gave me a 20-minute head massage. Then we did the rinse and the condition, and then they cut it and blow dried it. And I'm really happy with the result.
We went into the hip-hop warehouse with an EA.
Where he tried on a big bright green sweatshirt, hooded sweatshirt, with an animal that he could zip it all the way up and it covered his face.
Wow, my hair.
That is hilarious. This is our first shopping experience in China, and the aesthetic is sort of Times Square meets Soho meets Chinatown.
Really noisy. All the shops are playing music and commercials and ads, so definitely get an assault on all these senses on this street.
This is my kind of store.
Gotta get in somewhere.
As a whole, the city feels very content. It feels like a city of people who enjoy being here and are proud of their city.
We haven't run into any non-Chinese travelers at all while we've been here. Not on the trains, not in the museums, not in the parks, not even in the water cave. And that really surprised me. I can't believe that I sort of hadn't realized that before.
Today we are at the Boer Buddhist temple. It's in the northeast corner of People's Square in the center of Changchun. This is actually one of the 4 most major Buddhist temples in all of northeast China, and it's the biggest Buddhist temple in the city of Changchun. So the temple was built over about 10 years, starting in 1922 and ending in 1932. There are 40 monks who live, practice, eat, and sleep here, and it's usually a really hot tourist destination.
You first go in through these 2 huge red doors that you kind of push open. They feel like they must weigh a ton, and the first thing you see is a giant golden statue that had been made by the headmaster of this particular temple, and it looks like a golden spire.
And it's called the Bodhua, and it has 7 Chinese characters on it.
Which we were told meant that this temple will be prosperous if it is able to remain undisturbed from the outside world. And when we first walked in, it was almost laughable to me, like, oh, good luck with that, because it's so busy here and you can still hear the street, and there's skyscrapers and huge buildings exploding up around the stone walls around us. But it really wasn't very long before all of that just faded into the background, and this place just kind of envelops you, and you really do feel incredibly undisturbed by the outside world. We were greeted by one of the monks here, who was kind of our guide as we walked around. And we first walked to the left side when we first came in, and there was a giant statue that probably goes up about 25 feet in the air. On top is a Buddha statue.
Guan Shuyin, which is the Buddha of mercy.
And it's one that is considered a very sad Buddha, because it's one that feels the sadness of the world and takes that upon herself. And I was raised in a Christian environment. It reminded me of that part of my life.
Then the monk led us to the back hall where the 3 figures are kept. They're entirely gold-plated and they're kept in a glass case.
And these were actually the first ones which I really noticed a difference from ones that I had seen in India or in Nepal and places I'd been to Buddhist temples there. These ones looked very much more Chinese, the faces and the characters themselves.
And again, the monk led us in prayer, and he lit incense, 1 each to represent the Buddha, the scriptures, and the Bodhisattva. monk also invited us into the main hall. So we're in the main hall right now, and behind me is the first Buddha, Shakyamuni, with 2 disciples on either side. It's encased in glass, and it's raised up, and there's definitely a feeling of sort of grandeur in here. There's bright red light all around, and it's just an amazing experience.
It's used for morning and afternoon prayers and reflection. And on the sides of the glass enclosed Buddhas were 2 other Buddhas, one who was on a qiling, which is that sort of lion-dragon mixed character, and the other one on the other side was sitting on top of a very elephant-like creature. And along the walls and beside him are other disciples, and it all creates a very reflective mood in the hall here.
Then we were invited into a side hall, which is more like the size of a small church in the US.
We walked up the stairs and into this wide open, very plain tile room,
where there was a massive room with about 200 people in prayer. They were chanting and proceeding really solemnly and slowly in an S shape.
Men, women, old and young, all dressed in these brown robes.
And they actually invited us to join them. I'm not a religious person at all, but this was a really powerful experience.
And it was a really interesting feeling to kind of just let yourself go and be a part of that. And for me, I think that's the closest I get to religion, to just let myself go and be a part of something with other humans. And that's the most powerful thing for me. And that was what we were able to experience in that room.
After that, they invited us upstairs to the meditation room. This is a place where they normally don't allow visitors at all. I don't think women were allowed to meditate there. It was a very special circumstance that they allowed Chris to try.
I'm about flexible as a piece of steel, and it was peaceful, but it was hard not to think about how bad it was hurting. My limbs are not very movable, especially for that. I think it takes a lot of practice.
After we left the meditation hall, we entered into the center courtyard again, and we saw monks lining up for the dining hall because they were getting ready for lunch. It was quite interesting to see about 12 people lining up, holding bowls and chopsticks and towels.
And they walked across the courtyard, all very quiet and very serene, walked in front of us, and they went into a room which we were actually really fortunate to be able to go and join them.
And when you first walk in, you see these long metal tables with low, thin red benches. And in the center of the room is a monk who I guess resides over the meal. Chris and I were led into the back table, and we were all facing again the same way, so we could sort of see the back of about 20 other monks.
And as you sit down, everyone's very quiet. They do some chanting at the beginning and like a little prayer.
And then there are basically about 4 people who are serving the food.
And they have large, just steel aluminum buckets full of food, and they walk around and put first rice in one bowl. Each person has 2 bowls, and then someone follows him and has what were yam noodles and some tofu and cabbage, it looked like, and he follows and puts that in your other bowl.
And they serve you, and there's no talking whatsoever. Usually when you eat, it's a social time and everyone's talking and communicating, but this was a sort of a way of silently communicating, and everything was very methodical, but it didn't feel rigid. It felt very practical and very lilting, and it's a very gentle way to practice.
Very, very good experience today. I don't know, I don't believe in anything. I have no faith, but there's something about this beyond having faith, beyond believing in anything, but it's something because it's so personal. The experience of I think the practice here, that's something that's definitely affected me, that I'm definitely interested in continuing to learn about.
So I'm sitting here at the ginseng market. The path to get here was actually through a ground level tunnel. Sort of like a long pathway with shops and other mall stores. And you know you've gotten to the market when you see the Walmart on your left, and then you turn to the right and just opposite, it's this really interesting juxtaposition because there's this sort of natural, ancient remedy old market and then this huge Walmart right across the hallway.
The layout of the market is pretty similar to, I think, any outside market or flea market sort of style you might see anywhere in the world, but the contents are definitely not something I've ever seen anywhere. Anywhere I travel, I'm always one of the first places I try to head to is the market. It's usually a really good representation of a culture or a certain region, and this one is definitely that. There's a few specific treasures, as they call them, up here in the northeastern region, and we came to take a look at those, being the ginseng, the deer antler, and the dryland frog. So this is some ginseng here. It's the most popular of the three treasures of the northeast region here. Grows a lot up here. In fact, there's so much of it up here that it's many times cheaper than anywhere else you would find it in China.
As you can see, I'm holding a piece of dry ginseng here, and there's some hanging lining this entire shop. It's most commonly used for medicinal purposes for holistic health. So ginseng is known as the king of herbs, and it's a perennial herb that's really prevalent in this region, which makes sense because it grows on slopes and sort of high altitudes in the mountains. As you can see next to me, it comes in various forms. Some are dried, some are packaged. The wild ginseng is sort of the most coveted form, and some of them come in these velvet red boxes, and they sort of pin the roots down, and you can see this sort of like tree-like form, and it's really beautiful. And then others they slice up into tiny slivers. They sort of look like little potato skins or scales on a fish, and they package them in plastic, and that's what I actually decided to purchase. Mine are covered in a little bit of sugar, and I'm planning to either snack on them later or maybe put them in tea. So what I'm actually holding here are deer antlers. This is one of the three treasures from northeast China. Pretty smooth to the touch. There are little tiny hairs along here. Kind of looks like a wishbone.
So this is the most common way you see the antlers shaved up like this, and it's used to increase circulation. So if you're someone with cold hands or feet all the time, this is something you would want to look into getting to help solve that.
So we stopped in a corner shop here, and Chris and I are standing next to some dried dryland frog. It's one of the three treasures from this region in China.
So the most valuable part of the dryland frog is the fetus, and it's about once a year coming up here in October when you can harvest the frogs when they're pregnant. You can get the fetus and usually eat it with soup, or they even sell it in pill form, and it's meant to strengthen your entire body.
So we spent most of our time walking around at the shops, and something that's interesting is that each shop has a giant jar, maybe 2 feet high and a circumference of about 1 foot, full of a serum that includes some sort of liquor.
So what we've got here is liquor. Fermenting it inside for the last 3 years is ginseng, dryland frog, and oh my gosh, that maybe would have changed things before I drank it. Deer penis and testicles, and I had some, and it's really not bad at all. It goes down smooth. You want to try some?
Sure, I'll taste it. Yeah. Thanks for leaving me a little. It's pungent, and it has a sort of sharp, tangy taste to it. It's kind of viscous too, I guess, because there's a lot of solid material in there.
Tastes like a thin bourbon. Feels super strong.
Not bad at all.
A lot of different roots, a lot of different stuff. I actually made a couple of purchases. I got this box full of different roots and herbs, and even a starfish, and actually a lot of stuff I have no idea what it is, which is, I guess, kind of the fun, and the idea is to put it in liquor and save it for about 6 months or so, and then drink that, and it's supposed to make you healthier and enhance your sight and vision and all sorts of other things. So I'm excited for that. I thought if I was going to bring any souvenirs back from China and actually use them, it would probably be related to liquor. So I was glad that I found those. The only hard part will probably be holding on to it for 6 months, but I think I can wait.
When you stop to think about it, it's really interesting because you have the world's most populated country, nearly 1.5 billion people, using these ancient remedies for 5,000 years.
Something like that is not something you would want to ignore, and I think it's kind of one of those things for me today that it's like the more you see, the more you realize that you don't know, and just walking around and seeing all the stuff that I didn't even know what it was, it certainly piqued my interest to look into it.
So as someone who works in the health field, I'm often interested in the tension between Western biomedicine and traditional healing and alternative approaches, sort of homeopathy. So it's pretty fascinating that here in China, where that kind of practice, the alternative healing, is really prevalent, that you have this entire market that's a fixture here, it's a permanent market, and it's dedicated to holistic healing and remedies that really address Western biomedicine ailments, but through traditional ways.
We went out there to visit some of the small organic farms out there where we decided to pick some fresh organic produce to later cook in a hot pot, which is a local Manchurian way of cooking food.
This one's probably going at the normal pace maybe an Amtrak, a slow Amtrak car goes.
So we spent all morning today on our first day in Harbin walking along Central Street,
Which is famous for its cobblestone roads and shopping.
She's more of the egg eater, I'm the meat eater, the smoked pork. I'm very much looking forward to here, so I'm gonna start with that.
And I've never gotten so close to these swans or geese before, and it was just a really cool experience.
And the tigers, I just couldn't believe how big they were. I mean, these things were like horses, just enormous and really beautiful.
St. Sophia Church is a Russian Orthodox church, and at the very top of the dome, you see this really gorgeous chandelier hanging down, quite beautiful.